beautiful summer's day, you might be tempted to take a dip in the sparkling sea, but would you dare? Because Whitstable, although it's well known for its oysters, its boutique shops, and its lovely beaches, it's also becoming very well known for sewage. Just like everywhere else in England, the water and sewage system is owned and run in Whitstable by a private company. In the case of Kent, it's Southern Water. And Southern Water would rather pour out money to its shareholders than invest in the infrastructure needed to tackle sewage. That's why we need public ownership. Welcome, everyone. My name's Kat, and this is We Own It Live. It campaigns for public ownership. We believe in public services for people, not profit, and we want to do something about it. So if you do too, please click the subscribe button and the like button. Thank you so much for being here, and please do put your comments and questions in the chat. We'll get to them in the Q&A. So today we're talking about water. The way that England runs its water is completely crazy. Let's have a look at who owns our water and check out where you are on the map. England's water is owned by shareholders around the world, all over the place. And in Whitstable, in Kent, water is owned by Southern Water. So if you look at the system as a whole, 72 billion has gone out in dividends to shareholders since water was privatised in 1989. The private companies have built up a debt mountain of £60 billion, and they've essentially used that debt to fund their extremely high levels of dividends. And then the money from your bills has gone into the infrastructure. So what have these private water companies added? Really nothing at all. And they've been allowing sewage to flow into our rivers and seas and pipes to leak. So it's not really surprising that 65% of Conservative voters now think water should be in public hands, not least because there is no competition. Water is a natural monopoly. You don't get any choice about where the water's coming from when you turn on the tap, and there's only one set of pipes. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Ed Acteson, who's one of the founders of SOS Whitstable, which is campaigning against sewage in Whitstable. And we met at the weekend in person on Saturday when they were holding an amazing protest, which we'll come to later. Welcome, Ed.
Hi, Kat. How are you doing?
Really good. So it's lovely to have you on We Own It Live. And I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about the campaign because you've had incredible traction. You've had great media coverage. You've got these incredible protests. So tell me about how it started.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Our group's been going for just over 2 years now. We formed in 2021 as a consequence of a public meeting that was held in Whitstable by our local MP, Rosie Duffield. Effectively, there was representatives from Southern Water, the Environment Agency, and various other parties there. And back then, we were a little bit innocent and naive about the impact of sewage pollution. But a lot of people were swimming because we were kind of in and out of lockdowns, and a lot of sporting clubs and normal activities weren't available. So people were taking to the beach even during the winter and so on to swim. So suddenly we became aware that this sewage problem was here. And I mean, I've lived by the sea for most of my life and I still wasn't knowledgeable about it. And we went along to this meeting and were just really, really disheartened about what we heard. There was just no idea about the potential health risks involved. There was no time limits on when it might get fixed. It was just really just a redundant thing. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to form a local pressure group, I suppose, and start finding out these answers for ourselves. And obviously we've initially started off just aiming to deal with local issues in Whitstable. And I suppose we've been so staggered with the amount of support that we've received that we've expanded a little bit, and now we're trying to sort of pressure the government and the regulatory bodies and so on to make more widespread national change.
Amazing. I think so many people are completely staggered when they find out about this scandal. I mean, I became aware of raw sewage in rivers and seas probably soon after I started We Own It. So, 2013, 2014. And And by, a few years later, I was thinking, actually, I don't know if I want to swim in the river, even on a hot summer day, because I don't know what's going to be in there. And I think over the past few years, especially, we've seen so many people feeling that. And it's just devastating when you think about the benefits of, it's not just about swimming, there's lots of different ways that people enjoy the water, but the loveliness of swimming in the water on a hot summer's day is being taken away from people, and people are getting ill because of it. Not to mention, obviously, other kinds of things, fishing and boating and all of the wildlife that is at risk because of this.
Yeah, so we tend to divide the impact of sewage pollution up into sort of three different pillars. There's the sort of human aspects of it. So there's the public health risk, people using the beach, and obviously by extension, I suppose, pets as well going down there. There's the environmental risk, and obviously it doesn't take much imagination to work out how detrimental pumping thousands of hours of sewage into the every year is going to do to the environment. But then also there's a kind of an economic impact, which we find is happening for our town now. People are seeing Whitstable in the news for all the wrong reasons. And rather than saying this is an absolutely stunning town that we want to go to and enjoy, they're saying, well, the reputation of the sewage hotspot, so we're going to stay away. So that impacts not just industries like fishing and the oysterers, it has an impact into hospitality, and I suppose the entire high street has a knock-on effect. So it's really, really detrimental to everyone. And like you, we just weren't knowledgeable about it. And I think it's fair to say that sewage pollution is a relatively new issue in terms of being in the media, even though it's been going on for absolutely decades. Really, it's only been recently that the monitoring has come into place, so we're understanding now the extent of it. I think sometimes people think because of that, it's something that happens for the last few years. Actually, it's been going on for decades and decades, and has got progressively worse since privatisation in 1989.
Yeah, completely. So you went looking for answers, and you started to think maybe public ownership is the way forward. And you've done lots of different kind of campaigning activity, haven't you? Do you want to just tell us a bit about that? I think you've been monitoring the water quality, amongst other things.
We've been monitoring water quality in Whitstable in conjunction with Southern Water for the last few months, and there have been some bad results, but we're reviewing the process, as a lot of our results using testing processes that they put in place haven't quite matched the Environment Agency. So we've been a little bit careful not to publicise them and say things are potentially worse than they actually are, and that's sort of something that we'll be undertaking going forward. But yeah, it didn't take long before we started discussing the idea of public ownership again. And really, we couldn't think of any arguments against it. Ultimately, the main arguments you'll hear against doing this from politicians on social media are that it's too expensive, it would cost hundreds of billions of pounds, that investment levels would drop. But actually, we don't agree with that. We think that, and I'm sure you can probably say more about this, but there are ways of doing it where it won't cost hundreds of billions of pounds to achieve. And ultimately, this is a really important public service. Water is arguably one of the most vital services we have in the country. It needs to be managed properly. It's not just drinking water, it's waste disposal as well, and it's impacting so many different areas of our life. And ultimately, something like that needs to be done well. And as soon as you introduce profitability into the equation, obviously that's going to become the main driving factor. And that's what we found. When we look at these companies who are withdrawing billions of pounds of dividends every year and are riddled with debt, you can't argue that this sufficient money is being put into the infrastructure. Really, if you think, well, if we just remove the dividends, if we remove the obscene bonuses, if we get on top of the debt and run them sensibly, then all of the profit can just be put into investing in infrastructure. Either that, or because it'll be a government-run thing, our bills will go down. So it's going to have one of two benefits, really. I really don't see many arguments against it at this point.
Yeah, completely. And how have you found Southern Water has reacted to your campaigning?
Well, we've had regular meetings and discussions with Southern Water, and from my point of view, privately they will be very accommodating with us. They will try to help us where they can, but ultimately the only thing that really matters is the public performance. We see a lot of PR from them. We see a lot of marketing stuff on social media about their local community campaigns and what they're going to do to improve this issue. The figures show that this issue's getting worse. I mean, so last year, for instance, in Whitstable alone, there were 648 hours of sewage pollution, which works out at about 27 full days, so nearly an entire month. This year, we're up to 595 hours already, and we're not even in October yet, are we? So there's 3 months of the year left, 3 of the wettest months of the year. We're going to go miles past that total. Now, they will argue that last year was a particularly dry year, which is a fair point, but ultimately, we're not seeing the levels of investment and the dropping of the figures that we want to see here. And really concerningly, I mean, the amount of illegal releases. So last year, they released 195 times across their entire region, permit breaching releases. So those are effectively where on dry days where it hasn't been raining, they've still been releasing sewage into the sea. And that's 35% of the national total. So that's just one water company achieving that astonishingly high percentage. And it's over double what they did the year before. So they haven't got many arguments, they haven't got a leg to stand on when it comes to saying that they're improving, because they're patently not.
It is astonishing, isn't it? And this is a company that is mostly owned by Macquarie, which is an Australian investment bank, whose nickname is the Vampire Kangaroo. And Macquarie was one of the key owners of Thames Water, and one of the key reasons behind Thames Water's debt building up so much. So Macquarie really kind of asset stripped Thames Water and led it nearly to bankruptcy. And Macquarie is now the main owner of Southern Water. So that's not great. We saw with Southern Water, they gave out dividends of £902 million from 2010 to 2021. And then, you're saying obviously last year they were releasing illegal sewage. They've already been fined for that, haven't they? £90 million fine in 2021 for dumping sewage illegally 6,971 times. And it's like, that's not an accident, and they're still doing it. So why would we expect that to change? Obviously, this is their mode of operating.
Well, so this is a timeline for Southern Water the last 3 years. 2021, they get fined £90 million for what was called in court the worst environmental crimes in the history of the Environment Agency. So that's 2021. 2022, they released 24,124 hours of sewage into the sea across the entire region, which works out, it works out about 3 years worth of sewage in a single year if you add it up. So that's an awful 2 years. So you think at that point, they'd be trying to win back public favour, and they'd be saying, we're going to improve and this is what we're going to do and it's going to come out of our pockets. But no, this year they've put our bills up by around 10%, which is the biggest real terms increase in a decade. And they've effectively released to the media that in the rest of this decade, going up to 2030, they want to increase our bills by a further 73%. So they're almost going to be doubling. And it's just, there doesn't seem to be any genuine remorse there. They talk a really good game and they say, this isn't good enough, and our CEO's resigned and we're going to appoint a new one. Ultimately, it's all just a facade. They just want to take more and more money, more dividends. And you've referenced like the Australian investment bank who owns Southern Water. You have to question why an Australian investment bank would have any interest in running a public wastewater disposal utility in the southeast of England for any reason other than profit. There is none. They've run Thames Water into, I think it's £16 billion of debt, and they nearly went insolvent earlier this year as a result of it. And then, absolutely bafflingly, they've been allowed back in to own another water company, who are now, and Southern Water are £5 billion in debt now. And both companies are among 5 which Ofwat, who are the financial regulator for the industry, have earmarked as basically being a cause for concern. So it's just astonishing. Do you know what? You almost can't blame the water companies, because if the government are going to let them do it, they're going to do it, because they're not interested in running this service efficiently. They're not interested in giving us what we're paying for. They want to make their investors money. And ultimately, if you let them do that, they're going to do it. So the responsibility here has to fall on the government and the regulators, and both sides of that are failing miserably at the moment.
Yeah, Completely. Well, let's take a look at, I think we've had the slides showing some of your campaign activities so far. Let's take a look at the protests from last Saturday, because this is just an example, I think, of just such effective messaging in campaigning. And so, yeah, it was really exciting to arrive here in Whitstable and see all these people, a sea of red T-shirts on the hill, some amazing placards, lots of different varieties of placards. Obviously, Fergal Sharkey was there, and he was a big draw, and he supports SOS Whitstable and all of the anti-sewage campaigning around the country. Fantastic, more placards. Jenny Jones from the Green Party was there, gave a brilliant speech, and lots of kind of music and fun, and just so many people engaged in quite a small town, people just getting involved. So yeah, I wanted to kind of show some of the photos from the day, and just show what an amazing occasion it was and what fantastic campaigning SOS Whitstable are doing.
Thank you. I mean, we were so happy with the turnout. We've been really well supported locally. We've done 3 protests in a row in Whitstable, and we've completely winged it, to be honest. First year we didn't have a clue what we were doing, and we still got over 1,000 people show up. Last year we basically did a bit of a sort of a metaphorical crime scene on the beach to reflect Southern Water breaking the law, and we taped it all off with police tape and played sirens with damning statistics about them and stuff. This year we just went for more of a kind of like a traditional rally with some amazing speakers. I mean, we were really appreciative that you came down and you did a brilliant speech, and then we had Jenny Jones as well of the Green Party, who's amazing, and of course Fergal Sharkey to close. So 2,000 people showed up to see it again, and Whitstable's only got a population of around 30,000. So that's like a really high proportion of the town coming along to support this. And yeah, we were just overwhelmed. We really are bowled over by how much people have been supporting us. And ultimately, I mean, if you look at the protests or our petitions, which we've put out, it is really just public support that we've received that has allowed us to make the progress that we've had. Because ultimately, the media, the water companies, they only listen to people if they do get support from the public and they acknowledge that this is what people think. So we probably would have folded almost straight away if we hadn't had that support. So yeah, we're so grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, you've just been doing incredible work. So the petition that Ed's referring to is on change.org. It's an SOS Whitstable petition. It's got 280,000 signatures on it right now. So do sign that and show your support for that. And I think you've managed to achieve incredible kind of both national and media coverage of the issue, which has really driven this up the political agenda. And now we're seeing that sewage, you and other groups around the country have really put sewage on the agenda such that it's going to be a huge issue in the next election, which is brilliant. And it means we have to be talking about solutions and pushing all the political parties to go as far as they possibly can. So I feel like there was something else I wanted to say there. So let's talk about public ownership as a demand and what you want to see. So in my speech on Saturday, I talked about how it is realistic to have public ownership. That's what I wanted to say. If you've got questions for Ed, or for me around all of this, please pop them in the chat and we'll get to them shortly, because we really want this to be a kind of interactive discussion. Ed's a fantastic campaigner. We've got him here, so do give your questions and we will come to them very soon. So I talked about 4 different ways on Saturday that we could bring water into public ownership, and just kind of trying to pick apart the myth really that we can't do this, because I think it's so disempowering, for that many people to be on the beach with their amazing placards, fighting this fight, and then to feel like, oh, we're butting up against Southern Water and they're owned by a bank on the other side of the world, and what are we supposed to do about this, and we can't stop this sewage from flowing. So I think we have to be saying to people there are solutions on this, and there are solutions. It's a matter of political will. So I talked about obviously the case where if you've got a water company that's collapsing or on the brink of collapse, the way that Thames Water was a few months ago, get ready for special administration, get ready to take it into public ownership, and don't just give it back to the private sector, because that would be madness, but keep it in public ownership. and run it properly. That's one way. And obviously Southern Water has a very high level of debt. And, now being run by Macquarie, probably going to get worse. So, and Ofwat's obviously given them a slap on the wrist. Incidentally, Southern Water has been saying to the people who are boycotting paying their water bills, threatening them with debt collectors. But Southern Water itself is heavily, heavily indebted, so a bit of hypocrisy there. But that's one way that we could bring water into public ownership, is when the companies collapse. The second thing that we've suggested is shares, not fines. So water companies like Southern, obviously it was fined 90 million a few years ago, doesn't seem to have made any difference to how it operates. A lot of these water companies, these private water companies, just see fines as the cost of doing business and they just carry on. So we have to shift that. And we've suggested that taking shares from the companies when they mess up instead of fines might grab their attention a bit more and would gradually lead to public ownership over time. There's some really good work being done by people like Prem Sikka, the accountant, on the concept of environmental insolvency. So it's like, we need to regulate Southern Water to the point where we're saying, if you can't fulfill your environmental obligations because you're not spending enough, then regulate to make them spend enough. And that's probably going to also bring the share price down, because actually these companies are not worth as much as they seem to be on the face of it, because they're heavily indebted. They're not investing as they should be. They've brought nothing to the table. And so let's force them to do what they say they're going to do on the tin. And then, of course, just buying back the companies. And, that could be after some heavy regulation. So taking the shares, releasing new government bonds. And because that would be an asset swap, that is cost neutral. There is no upfront cost to that. All you need to do is service the interest on the government bonds, which you can do because you've got the revenue coming in from customers' bills. So different ways of bringing water into public ownership. We'll delve into those a bit more in an upcoming YouTube Live, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on those, Ed, and what you think about that.
Firstly, very well summarised. Definitely better than I would be able to do there. Look, when we first kind of mooted the idea of public ownership, again, it was something that we were probably lacking knowledge in. And the immediate assumption was we would just have to purchase it back at the cost price probably set by the company. And that tends to be the main argument against, as I alluded to earlier, by MPs. They say, this is going to cost far too much. It's going to cost hundreds of billions, and that's going to raise people's taxes by X amount, and it's just unsustainable during a cost of living crisis. Of course, as we now know, that just isn't the case. And there are some really, really strong alternatives. There's environmental insolvency, as you've already mentioned. And people might be familiar with him, but there's a political economist called Richard Murphy on Twitter who did a really, really good thread on this recently. And actually, before I came on the call today, I retweeted the threads just in case anyone wants to go onto our Twitter feeds and have a read through. He explains the way that these companies operate and that they make an astonishing operating profit. They make 30p in the pound operating profit. So that is effectively their profit before the cost of borrowing is factored in. So we know that the cost of borrowing for them is significantly high because they're so riddled with debt. So when you take that off, they still end up making maybe 10p in the pound profit or something. The problem is that historically, since privatisation occurred, they've taken 15p in the pound out as dividends. So they are taking more out in dividends than they are able to actually make as profit. And a tenth of the money, 10p in the pound, is a very healthy profit for most businesses, especially with such a large client base. But it's not enough for them. They're taking more than that. That's led to the debt. And as a result of that, as you've intimated, I would suggest that they qualify for environmental insolvency, because if they can only fix this issue by charging us more and more and more on top of what they already do, they clearly are not running the business efficiently enough to continue. So we think that's a real option. A very credible alternative, though, that we had never heard of before and that you let us know about, is the idea of shares instead of fines. Because as you've said, Southern Water were fined £90 million, biggest fine in the history of the industry by a long, long way. And it hasn't stopped them. Their illegal releases doubled last year. And ultimately, the government are not making the regulators regulate this industry well enough. They're getting away with it. They're underfunded. They're inefficient. So there's no fear factor involved for these companies until you introduce that fear factor and you say to them, if you do this, we are going to make you very unprofitable. Then they're going to carry on doing it. So ultimately, I think the idea of potentially giving shares back to the people and watering down their shares and doing like that will introduce a fear factor, because they'll think, hang on, we can't keep doing this enough. So something's got to happen, because unless there is, I mean, we're expecting probably a change of government at the next election, but even the Labour Party haven't committed to public ownership in this industry. So as far as we're concerned, unless they come in with really, really strict measures, it's going to have to be considered at some point down the line. Otherwise, they're going to continue just, taking advantage of us.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's brilliantly explained. And for the argument around the profit margins, do check out Richard Murphy if you're interested in this, because I think, that gives a really, really useful explanation there of the money in each pound sort of flowing out of the system. And of course, as you say, we can't rely on these regulators, not least also because there's a revolving door. A lot of the people in the water industry are just rotating between Ofwat, the regulator, and the companies. For example, Catherine Ross, who was previously the head of Ofwat, now working, was she the head of Ofwat? I need to double check that. Maybe somebody can put a comment in the chat. Now one of the interim directors of Thames Water. Just a kind of scandalous situation. How can we trust a regulator that is so embedded and in bed with the water companies? So
it's absolutely insane. And sorry to interrupt, but just to briefly add that the Environment Agency, I mean, this is how ridiculous this situation is. The Environment Agency pension fund actually has millions of pounds of shares in the water industry. So they are effectively being asked to regulate an industry that they have a financial incentive in performing well. I mean, it's such a conflict of interest on so many levels. As you said, there's people going between the regulators and the industry. And until that's stopped, I mean, it's no surprise that they're not taking action on these things when it's their mates and potential future employers who they're supposed to be investigating.
Completely. And we need to have the people who are actually affected by this holding these companies accountable. So let's just get up that slide where we've looked at, this is an extract from our report, When We Own It. We were just suggesting a governance model here where you would have consumers, citizens involved. You'd also have workers involved. You'd also have community groups, environmental groups. So, for example, if you have Southern Water in public ownership, you could have a group like SOS Whitstable having a representative on the board of Southern Water and holding the company accountable for its progress, because those are the people who actually care about the seafront and the town and the environment and the wildlife. So that's what we're thinking when we're talking about public ownership, is something that really involves the widest possible public that is affected. And this is a suggestion of how that could be done. So let's get to the Q&A, because I think there's lots of great questions coming through. And I think this is a lovely question to start with from Liz, saying, what makes your campaign successful, Ed? Was there any one thing that really helped?
I think we've been very fortunate in the sense that we were just a collection of friends who were members of the local swimming group, the Blue Tits, and there's chapters of that all over the country. And we just sort of all joined together with this interest in fixing this issue. And by complete coincidence, we've got a really quite diverse skill set. So there are people who are good with the media, people who are good at writing press releases. We've got a sound engineer, which obviously makes holding a protest very, very easy and useful. So that's the first part of it. We're just lucky that we've got some really great people with different sort of skill sets. I mean, we've got people who are interested in science, whereas I'm absolutely useless. And if the water testing was left to me, it would be a complete disaster. But other people, fortunately, are far more intelligent than me on this front, so they're able to do it really efficiently. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, it's just the public support. We're just so lucky that, first of all, everyone in Whitstable has got behind us and been really supportive. Secondly, we've then joined sort of Twitter, which is obviously more of a sort of mainstream platform with people all around the country, and we've got a lot of support there as well, especially from high-profile people like Fergal Sharkey, who retweet us a lot. And thirdly, I think a really important thing is that this is a unifying issue. So we've obviously, over the last 10, 15 years in this country, seen all these different debates like Brexit and so on, which are really divisive, and people are fiercely on one side or the other side. It leads to quite a lot of unpleasant exchanges on social media. It's not like that on water pollution. We found that it doesn't matter if you're sort of a traditional Labour voter or you're a Conservative voter or Green Party or Lib Dems or whoever it is, everyone agrees that water pollution is awful, it's detrimental, it shouldn't happen. And really, because of that, it's so easy to get support and get people behind you on this issue. The only people who disagree with us are the people who have financial incentives to think otherwise. So I suppose those three things have kind of led us to where we are now, and we're just hoping that we continue growing and continue making an impact.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that was what really struck me in meeting you, but before meeting you as well, is you're really focused, which I think being focused is really important on something that brings people together. Obviously, really positive, in putting forward solutions, and also, it seems like such a creative campaign. There's so many different aspects, and you're great communicators as well. And it seems like the whole town of Whitstable is full of great communicators who are kind of coming out with these placards and wanting to make a splash. No pun intended. Okay, great. So let's just see some other questions. Liz says, another one from Liz. Surely these companies should be retrospectively fined up to the amount they would ask us to pay them for taking the companies back into public ownership. And
I think with that, it's just it takes so long for these prosecutions to occur. I mean, the fine for Southern Water in 2021 was actually for incidents that occurred between 2010 and 2015. So based on how long it's taken them to do that, the illegal releases that they're doing now, we wouldn't expect them to be sort of punished until the late 2020s. I mean, one thing that Labour have said they'll put in place is automatic fines, which obviously, if we're going to say that they're not in favour of public ownership straight away, then at the very least we want them to put in place ideas like this, which are going to make it a lot more difficult. But yeah, really, I just think and it goes back to how bad the regulators are again. It's so slow and so difficult to prosecute them that we don't see it happen nearly as often as we'd like to.
Yeah, totally. Some great comments as well in the chat. Louise says, sea swimming is prescribed by health professionals. How ironic that the sea can actually make you ill. Where is the government? Oh my goodness, I couldn't agree more with this comment.
Completely. Yeah, it should be, again, going back to the pandemic, it was all we had. It was one of the very few things that we could go out and do. And we all did it thinking this is going to be brilliant for us, and cold water swimming is supposedly very, very good for you. And actually, what we're seeing is people are taking a health risk, and we're getting DMs all the time on Twitter saying, I went swimming after a release and I got ill, and, I've had sickness and so on. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. It should be such a positive thing. I mean, I personally, I feel very patriotic about the UK in terms of what we offer as a holiday destination. I think we're such a beautiful country with amazing stretches of coastline, and we should be marketing these to the world and saying, come and visit us. We might not be able to offer you guaranteed heat like other countries, but we can offer you some amazing, amazing, beautiful locations. But how can we do that when we treat the coast like this, and when there are no rivers in the UK in good ecological health? I mean, we're shooting ourselves in the foot on this issue, and it really just comes down to corporate greed and the government allowing the corporate greed.
Yeah, completely. I totally agree. It's very sad. Are you swimming in the sea these days? What do you do personally?
I've lived by the coast for nearly my entire life. I've always loved swimming in the sea. I go in all year round, even when it's freezing, and it does make you feel amazing, and it's such a good escape. And we have this massive swimming community where we are, and people get up at 4 a.m. during the summer to go for sunrise swims, and we go for full moon swims in the darkness, and all times of day. Whenever the tide's high, you will see people swimming in Whitstable. And it's really sad to say that this year particularly I have been in the sea less, because now I'm so aware of it. And because I've got young kids, perhaps if I was in my 20s, I'd be a bit more reckless about it, but I'm not, and I've got young kids to look after. and I don't want to take the chance of getting ill, and I don't want to take the chance of passing it on. So because of that, I have been in less. I still swim all year round, but it's a very methodical process now of checking the releases, and we don't even have particular faith in the reporting that it's quick and they promise it's near real time, but sometimes we see the website being updated 8-9 hours after release has gone out, and often that's just too late for people who've been in. So yeah, I mean, we certainly wouldn't put people off going in the sea. We really wouldn't. All we'd say is check on, if you live in the southeast, check the Southern Water website. If you live outside the southeast, check the Surfers Against Sewage app, and they will tell you. Just be careful, really, but definitely enjoy the beach still. But yeah, just don't take any unnecessary risks for your health.
Yeah, but people shouldn't have to make those choices, and especially when climate change is getting worse and the country's getting hotter, it should be possible to cool down in the sea or in a river. It's such an important natural resource that we should have on our doorstep and make the most of, and we should be able to be encouraging people into cold water swimming and swimming in the summer.
Yeah, and it's not even just like our own national reputation now. We're seeing reports all across Europe. We kept getting press requests from France. We had one from Japan. All these different countries taking an interest in England polluting our own seas. So that shows, as soon as it starts going to countries in different continents, you know that you've got a serious issue.
Yeah, it's desperate, isn't it? And can the Conservatives please conserve the health of our country rather than running it down? So yeah, I'll check other comments. Great to see all of the comments in the chat. Gail says, very impressive campaign. Humour is very effective. Margaret says, excellent session. I'm learning a lot. Valerie says, why no subtitles? Unfortunately, I'm hard of hearing. I think we've enabled the subtitles. You can click on YouTube, or maybe put a comment in the chat about that. But if not, we will pop something on there for next time, Valerie. And Chris says, privatisation doesn't work. Thatcher should go down in the history books for being a complete idiot as she started all this rubbish, which is true. Back in 1989, it was privatisation of the water, and it's been an absolute failed experiment. And Delma says, fantastic presentation, thanks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So, Ed, we're promoting your petition. We're also promoting our Shares Not Fines petition. That's the action of the week. And we'll put those in the description underneath the YouTube video. Is there anything else you want people to know? I think you've had offers of people coming to join your. Gail says, hi Ed, let us know when your next rally/demo will be and we'll come along. It's probably next year.
Definitely will. We'll hold you to that. Please come down. Yeah. I mean, really, I assume you've got people watching from all over the country. I would say find out who your local campaign group are, because there are really some wonderful campaign groups across the country, all of whom need support, all of whom need, you to show them that you believe in this issue too, because it feels like such a thankless task campaigning for this. I mean, none of us are full-time campaigners. We've all got jobs, families, social lives and stuff. We're doing this in our spare time. And there are really times when you just think, is it worth it? There's no progress on this. We're being fobbed off. And ultimately, when you get positive comments from people, it really makes a difference, and it makes you feel like you're doing the right thing. So please support any local groups you have to, write to your MPs, demand action on this, and really just be as much of a pain in the butt to water companies on social media as you can, because it really upsets them, and we like doing that.
You're doing absolutely amazing work, Ed, and it's such a joy to be connected to what you're doing. And yeah, do get involved, as Ed says. And thanks everyone for being here. It's been really inspiring. It's great to hear a bit more about the campaign and how it works. And let's bring water into public ownership. Let's push for victories, because we've got amazing campaigners here. We must be able to get some victories. Thanks everyone for joining. Please do like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and once the YouTube live is finished, please pop a comment in the chat of the YouTube as well, and that will help the algorithm know that this is stuff that people want to see. So next time somebody searches for SOS Whitstable or sewage on YouTube, hopefully this video will pop up. Thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next Thursday at 5 p.m.